Inside the Galilee market 2,000 years ago, how trade and commerce worked in the time of Jesus. Inside the Galilee market 2,000 years ago, how trade and commerce worked in the time of Jesus. Have you ever wondered if the coins clinking in a dusty palm carried more weight than the prayers whispered in the temple nearby? Is it possible that the smell of salted fish and the texture of unwashed wool define a civilization more accurately than the grand marble monuments of its conquerors? Could a simple wooden measuring cup for grain be the true architect of social stability in a world on the brink of upheaval? What if the most revolutionary ideas of the first century weren't born in quiet meditation, but amidst the aggressive haggling of a crowded stall? Do we truly understand the desperation of a merchant whose entire livelihood depended on the fickle arrival of a caravan from the east? You might expect a world of primitive simplicity, a quiet biblical landscape of static figures in white robes, but the reality of the Galilee market is a sensory collision of brutal efficiency and fragile survival. You are not just a visitor here. You are an observer of a complex living machine where every transaction is a pulse of life. In these next moments, you will go beyond the surface of history to feel the heat of the sun on limestone and the grit of the trade routes under your fingernails. You are walking into the heart of Magdala, a bustling commercial hub on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The air is thick, a heavy mixture of evaporating lake water, sun-dried mud, and the sharp, acidic sting of fermenting fish guts from the processing vats. The ground beneath your sandals is uneven, composed of basalt stones polished smooth by thousands of feet, and the iron-rimmed wheels of heavy carts. As you move deeper into the narrow corridors of the marketplace, the light shifts from the blinding Mediterranean glare to the cool, dappled shadows of linen awnings stretched between stone walls. You hear the rhythmic thud of a stone mill nearby, a constant low-frequency vibration that seems like hum in your very bones. The atmosphere is dense with the sound of Aramaic vowels clashing with the sharp consonants of Greek, the languages of survival and profit intertwined. Notice the texture of the walls. The rough-hewn limestone is cool to the touch, but it radiates the stored heat of the morning. This is not a place of leisure. It is a place of friction. Every basket of lentils, every jar of oil, and every woven tunic represents a delicate balance between the abundance of the land and the crushing weight of Roman taxation. You see a merchant adjusting a set of bronze scales, his fingers moving with a practiced, cynical grace. He knows that a fraction of a shekel is the difference between a surplus and hunger. The stability of this entire region rests on these small, repetitive acts of exchange. If the grain does not move, the city does not eat. If the tax is not paid, the legionaries descend. You are witnessing the raw mechanics of an ancient economy where trust is a luxury and precision is a necessity. As you stand in the center of this swirling commerce, you begin to realize that the marketplace is the true temple of daily life, a cathedral of necessity where the sacred and the profane are soldered by the weight. The microclimate of the market is its own ecosystem. The humidity from the nearby Sea of Galilee, trapped by the high basalt and limestone walls of the shops, creates a heavy, pressurized atmosphere that smells of wet earth and ancient minerals. You observe the dust motes dancing in the rare shafts of sunlight that penetrate the heavy linen awnings. This dust is a microscopic archive of the entire Mediterranean world. Particles of volcanic ash from distant eruptions, dried skin of pack animals, the pulverized fibers of Egyptian flax, and the salt crystals carried by the winds from the Great Sea. Your nostrils burn slightly from the acrid smoke of small charcoal braziers where street vendors are roasting chickpeas and bitter herbs, a smell that battles against the sweet, cloying aroma of fermenting dates stacked in massive, sticky mounds. The sounds are not merely noise, they are a sophisticated data stream of economic health. The high-pitched ring of a silver denarius on a stone table indicates a high-value transaction, while the dull thud of a copper pruta suggests the desperate purchase of a daily ration of bread. You hear the rhythmic scraping of a metal shovel against the bottom of a grain bin, a sound that signals the end of a merchant's stock and the beginning of a price hike. Every animal in the market contributes to the cacophony, the braying of overworked donkeys, the low, guttural grunts of camels that have traveled weeks from the Nabatean kingdom, and the frantic fluttering of caged pigeons destined for the local altars or the dinner tables of the wealthy. The physical pressure of the crowd is constant. You feel the coarse wool of a worker's tunic brush against your arm, leaving a faint residue of lanolin and sweat. This is the friction of humanity forced into a narrow space by the requirements of the state. The architecture itself is designed to funnel this energy toward the tax collector's booth, a central node of imperial power made of cold, unyielding stone. You see the scribes with their wax tablets and reed pens, their eyes darting with mechanical efficiency as they record every basket and every jar. This is not just a market, it is a living ledger, a biological machine that converts the raw labor of the Galilean soil into the abstract wealth of the Roman Empire. You are standing at the exact point where the ancient world meets the machinery of the future, a place where the survival of the individual is secondary to the stability of the system. Make sure you're already subscribed to this channel, because understanding the deep roots of commerce and human survival is the only way to truly decipher how the world you live in today was built on the sweat and engineering of those who came before us. The transition from the open air into the dense, suffocating urban grid of the market reveals the architecture of exchange, a complex skeleton of stone and shadow meticulously designed to facilitate the flow of goods while extracting every possible drop of value for the insatiable Roman state. You find yourself navigating narrow, winding alleys where the sun only manages to hit the dusty ground for a few precious minutes at noon, and the temperature drops sharply as the massive stone walls close in around you like a structural embrace. These structures are not mere buildings meant for shelter. They are sophisticated instruments of control, categorization, and intimidation. To your left, the vaulted archways of the larger shops are constructed from massive, rectangular basalt blocks, their dark, porous surfaces absorbing the humidity of the lake and the salt from the air. You reach out and touch the stone. It is rough, cold, and pitted with tiny holes, a silent witness to the volcanic history of the Rift Valley. Inside these shops, the floors are made of either tightly packed, oiled earth or simple monochromatic mosaics that feel cool and damp beneath the feet of the merchants. This is where the high-value goods, imported Italian wine, fine oils from the coastal plains, and expensive glass vessels from Phoenicia, are stored in heavy, pointed terracotta amphorae lined with resin. You notice the architectural logic at work. The heaviest, most cumbersome items stay near the main basalt gates, while the lighter, more expensive luxuries are tucked away in the most defensible, shadowed, and interior recesses of the market, where the air is stagnant and smells of ancient dust. The spatial arrangement is a physical map of the social and economic hierarchy. The closest a shop is situated to the main thoroughfare, the more it is forced to pay an exorbitant rent and heavy taxes to the local Herodian authorities. You see the tax collector's booth, a solid, imposing stone platform situated at the crossroads where no merchant, no matter how small, can pass without being subjected to a cold, calculating gaze. The architecture here is meant to intimidate as much as to shelter. The low ceilings and thick walls create a sense of permanent, heavy surveillance. The sound of copper coins hitting a stone table is the percussion of the morning, a sharp, metallic ring that echoes off the low, vaulted ceilings like a repetitive warning. You feel the physical weight of the coins in your own hand. They are small, thin, and often worn smooth by decades of circulation, yet they represent hours of back-breaking, lung-searing labor in the sun-drained fields of the Galilee. The architecture of the market creates a sense of permanent surveillance. There is nowhere to hide a transaction from the eyes of the state. Every bag of grain must be poured into the official stone measuring vessels, standardized hollowed-out rocks that ensure no one cheats the Roman grain tax. Every skin of wine must be inspected for the wax seals of the province, ensuring that the liquid inside is exactly what the label claims it to be. This is a world of rigid boundaries and heavy, unyielding materials, where the fragility of a single person's wealth is constantly contrasted with the enduring, cold, and indifferent stability of the Roman infrastructure. You look up and see the timber beams supporting the upper floors. They are made of sycamore and cedar, darkened by the smoke of 1,000 oil lamps and carved with the tallies of forgotten debts. The drainage system is another marvel of brutal efficiency. Narrow gutters carved directly into the basalt floor carry away the wastewater, the spilled wine, and the blood from the occasional slaughter of animals, funneling the waste toward the lake. You realize that this architecture is a machine for living, a stone heart that pumps the lifeblood D of commerce through the veins of the province. Every archway is a gateway to a different level of society, from the street-level beggar to the hidden, wealthy investor who owns the very stones you are walking on. Comment. The architecture of men is the prison of the poor, to show that you are paying attention to the structural traps of the ancient world, and to prove you are an observer who sees beyond the surface of the history books. As you leave the cold, oppressive shadows of the stone corridors and head toward the expansive, open-air agricultural sector, the smell of the earth rises to meet you in a thick, sweet, and almost overwhelming aroma of sun-warmed grain, drying stalks, and pulverized minerals. This is the fragrance of the earth, the true, unyielding engine of the Galilee, a region whose volcanic soil is so fertile it was once whispered to be the garden of the gods. You see the vast, shimmering heaps of wheat and barley, golden mounds that represent the literal survival of thousands of families across the valley. You reach out and run your hand through a heavy wicker basket of grain. The kernels are hard, dry, and dusty, clicking together like tiny, polished pebbles against your skin. The texture tells a silent, desperate story of the previous season's rainfall, or the lack thereof. If the grain is plump and heavy, the entire village breathes a collective, audible sigh of relief. If it is shriveled, light, and gray, the tension in the air is palpable, a static charge of fear that precedes a famine. You see the farmers, their skin dark, leathery, and deeply lined from decades of exposure to the relentless Mediterranean sun, their eyes scanning the potential buyers with a sharp, weary mixture of hope and exhaustion. The rhythm of the market follows the biological rhythm of the soil with absolute precision. In the early spring, the air here is bright, crisp, and filled with the sharp, green scent of fresh herbs, bitter lettuce, and early vegetables like leeks and garlic. But now, in the peak heat of the trade season, everything is dry, concentrated, and heavy with the scent of preservation. The trade of grain is not just mere commerce, it is the fundamental currency of life itself in a world where bread is the only thing standing between a family and the abyss. You watch as a professional buyer, dressed in a slightly cleaner tunic, bites into a single kernel of wheat to test its internal hardness and moisture content. A primitive but incredibly effective form of quality control that has remained unchanged for millennia. The soundscape of the market here changes significantly. It is the soft, rhythmic rustle of heavy hemp bags being dragged across the dirt, the hollow sound of seeds being poured into official wooden measures, and the low, constant, rhythmic grunting of hundreds of donkeys carrying the heavy, dusty loads from the threshing floors of the surrounding hills. There is a visible abundance here that feels strangely deceptive, for you know deep down that a significance of this golden harvest is already legally spoken for by the heavy religious titles and the cold bureaucratic portion requirements of the imperial Roman grain ships waiting at the coast. The contrast is visceral and jarring, the sight of so much potential food in a place where so many faces look lean, hollow-cheeked, and hungry. It is a functional, brutal landscape where every single seed is accounted for by a scribe's reed pen, and where the failure of a single microcrop could turn this bustling center of life into a silent, dusty ghost town within a single season. You notice the piles of vegetables, lentils of various shades, chickpeas dried to the hardness of stones, and broad beans that carry the scent of the dry earth. These are the proteins of the poor, stored in massive clay jars that radiate the day's heat. Nearby, the fruit sellers offer dates so sticky with natural sugar that they attract clouds of bees, their hum adding a drone to the market's choir. You see the pomegranates, their leathery skin bursting to reveal seeds that look like edible rubies, a luxury of sweetness in a life defined by the bitterness of labor. The logistics of this sector are a nightmare of weight and heat. Every basket must be moved by human or animal muscle, and the sheer caloric energy expended to bring this food to market is staggering. You feel the fine dust of the chaff entering your lungs, a dry, irritating reminder of the threshing floor where the wind was used to separate the life-giving grain from the useless husk. This is the raw, unpolished heart of the ancient economy, where the wealth of the land is measured in bushels and the worth of a man is measured by the strength of his back. Make sure to like this video if you are fascinated by how the ancient world managed to survive such immense pressures through sheer willpower and organization, and how these humble grains built the foundations of empires that thought they would last forever are. Moving further into the dark, pulsating heart of the commerce, you enter the zone of silver, copper, and salt, a place where the abstract, cold value of the physical world is negotiated with a clinical and often brutal intensity. The air becomes noticeably sharper here, smelling of the distinct metallic tang of oxidized bronze and the overwhelming mineral and almost sterile scent of massive salt blocks stacked like white bricks against the limestone walls. Salt is the invisible, undisputed king of the Galilee market, an essential chemical preservative for the fish that feeds the Roman legions across the empire, and its relative value is as stable and reliable as gold itself. You see men with heavy mallets chipping away at large, crystalline white slabs, the tiny shards flying through the air like frozen sparks. To truly understand this ancient world, you must first master the dizzying complexity of its coins, a linguistic and economic maze of imperial power and local resistance. You see the prestigious Roman denarius, with its cold silver sheen and the sharp, arrogant profile of the emperor, circulating alongside the humble, thin copper pruta issued by the local Herodian governors. The money changers, men with eyes like hawks and hearts of flint, sit behind heavy, dark wooden tables reinforced with thick iron bands to prevent theft, their fingers flicking with speed between the various chaotic mechanical currencies of the Mediterranean basin. They are the cynical gatekeepers of value, translating the back-breaking labor of a Galilean peasant into the sophisticated, abstract language of international trade. You watch a transaction take place with agonizing slowness. A massive pile of gray salt is exchanged for a mere handful of dull copper. It is a slow, deliberate, and deeply suspicious process, involving the constant weighing of every single coin on delicate bronze scales and the obsessive checking for counterfeit colors or shaved edges that would diminish the metal's worth. The atmosphere is thick with a tension that you can feel in your teeth, for in this specific sector of the market, a single mistake in a mental calculation is not just an error. It is a financial disaster that can ruin a family. You are surrounded by the distinct sounds of the money changers, the rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of their wooden counting boards, and the hushed, urgent, and often angry whispers of men debating the fluctuating exchange rates between the Tyrian shekel and the Roman drachma. Every single pile of coins you see represents a different, overlapping level of imperial presence and religious obligation. The silver Tyrian shekel, pure, heavy, and untainted by the images of foreign gods, is the only currency demanded for the sacred temple tax in Jerusalem, while the everyday grimy business of survival is conducted in the debased local alloys of lead and copper. You begin to realize that to hold a coin in this market is to hold a physical piece of political propaganda. The inscriptions and images struck into these metals define who legally owns the land, who controls the water, and who ultimately owns the people walking these streets. You see an old merchant testing a silver coin by biting it with his remaining teeth, his jaw muscles tensing as he looks for the telltale softness of lead hidden under a thin silver wash. Fraud is a constant breathing threat here, and trust is a fragile thing built entirely on the cold, mathematical precision of the balance scale. The table of the money changer is a perfect microcosm of the world's wider power struggles, a place where the wealth of a nation is reduced to a few handfuls of metal and the ability of a few men to read the fine, deceptive print of imperial law. You notice the abacus-like tools they use, the stone beads sliding with a clinical final click that seems to temporarily silence the surrounding chaos of the crowd. This is the exact point where the warm sweat of the farmer is converted into the cold, dead, and immortal language of international capital. Share this video with a friend who loves history and would be amazed to see how similar the ancient financial struggles are to the ones we face in our modern world, where the symbols of power may have changed, but the weight of the debt remains the same. The salt merchants are particularly busy today. They handle the white gold with a reverence that borders on the religious. Without this mineral, Galilee's fishing industry would collapse in a single day, as the heat would rot the catch before it reached the city gates. You see the large hemp sacks stained with the brine of 1,000 years, their rough texture a contrast to the smooth, cold surface of the silver coins. The salt comes from the Dead Sea, carried by long, dusty caravans through the Jordan Valley, and its price reflects the danger of the journey. To spill salt here is not just bad luck. It is a waste of a commodity that was once used to pay the Veeri soldiers who guard the gates. This is the chemistry of the economy, a world of minerals and metals that dictates the fate of every soul in the province. Turning a sharp, shadowed corner where the limestone walls are stained with the residues of 1,000 passing shoulders, you are suddenly and completely enveloped by the vibrant, muffled, and intensely aromatic world of the textile merchants. The complex threads of identity that define every single person in this swirling Mediterranean crowd. The acoustic environment changes instantly. The sharp, aggressive metallic clatter of the money changers is replaced by the soft, rhythmic, and hypnotic thud of heavy wooden looms and the dry, organic rustle of massive piles of unprocessed fabrics. The air here is thick, heavy enough to actually taste, saturated with the primal smell of wet sheep's wool, raw flax stalks soaking in water, and the pungent, fermented, and slightly ammoniac odor of the deep dye vats. You see long, majestic strips of linen hanging from the cedar rafters, swaying like pale ghosts in the light. Hot breeze that manages to snake its way through the narrow upper reaches of the alleyways. Some are the pale, cream-like natural color of the sun-bleached earth, while others are deep, bruised royal purples and rich, burnt ochre yellows that seem to glow in the semi-darkness of the stalls. You reach out and touch a piece of unwashed, raw wool. It is oily, thick, and surprisingly rough, still smelling strongly of the hardy sheep that graze the rocky, windswept hills of the Golan Heights or the distant Judean wilderness. The lanolin sticks to your skin, a greasy reminder of the animal origin of this wealth. Right next to it, a piece of fine, imported Egyptian linen feels like cool, silk-like water against your heated skin. A high-status luxury reserved strictly for the elite, the high-ranking tax collectors, and the cold Roman administrators who govern this province from their seaside palaces. In this market, what you wear is not just a choice. It is your walking biography, your legal status, your economic class, and your religious affiliation all woven into a single visible garment. The precise length of a decorative fringe, the chemical depth of a dye, and the mechanical tightness of a weave every tell observer your status, your tribe, and your relative liquid wealth before you even speak a single word of Aramaic or Greek. You see the weavers, their fingers permanently stained a deep ghost-like blue and blood red from the dyes, moving with a terrifying, mechanical speed that speaks of a lifetime of repetitive, soul-crushing, and grueling motion. They are the silent creators of the social fabric, turning the raw, chaotic products of the land into the organized symbols of human dignity and power. The contrast between the rough, gray, functional tunics of the day laborers, heavily stained with the salt of sweat and the brown dust of the roads, and the flowing, intricately embroidered robes of the wealthy merchant class is a stark visual representation of the deep structural inequalities that pulse through the heart of the Galilee. You notice the meticulous, almost frantic work of the spinners in the background, their wooden spindles whirring like heavy insects in the dust, creating the fine, strong threads that will eventually be weighed, measured, and taxed with clinical precision by the Roman authorities. Every single knot, every hidden seam, and every decorative border is a testament to the thousands of unseen hours of manual labor required to present oneself as a human being to the world. The dyes themselves are a profound marvel of ancient chemistry and biological exploitation. The world-famous Tyrian purple, laboriously extracted from the glandular secretions of thousands upon thousands of tiny murex sea snails, represents an absolute fortune in a single small garment, a color so expensive that to wear it without the proper rank is a direct provocation to the emperor himself. You see the cheaper, more common substitutes made from the boiled roots of the madder plant, Kermes insects, and dried pomegranate skins, providing the common people with a fleeting, fading splash of color in an otherwise monochromatic and dusty existence. This is the massive, breathing industry of appearance, where the material world of fibers and minerals defines the spiritual and social hierarchy of the entire region. The texture of the market here is softer, but the stakes are just as high as in the grain stalls. A ruined shipment of wool or a spoiled vat of dye can mean the immediate end of a family's commercial lineage. You watch a merchant unfolding a roll of silk that has traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road, its shimmering surface reflecting the flickering light of an oil lamp like a captured soul. It is out of place here, a fragment of a distant, mysterious empire that most in this market will never even see on a map. This is the global reach of Thaish and Galilee, a node in a network of threads that stretches from the fog-shrouded Atlantic to the moist forests of the east, all converging here in a cacophony of color and the smell of wet wool. Share this video with someone who values the intricate, hidden history of the clothes we wear, as these ancient weavers were the ones who first defined the patterns of our modern social identity. Finally, you descend toward the lower market, the literal and metaphorical basin of the city, where the air grows heavy, thick, and almost solid with the brine, the cold slime, and the silver scale of the fisherman's ancient legacy. This is the exact geographic point where the fresh, untamed life of the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, collides violently with the calculated, hungry economy of the wider Roman world. The acoustic environment here is no longer dominated by the dry rustle of textiles or the click of coins, but by the wet, rhythmic slapping of heavy fish on porous stone slabs and the constant, aggressive shouting of the wholesalers who coordinate the logistics of shipping salted tilapia and carp as far as the imperial tables of Rome and the granaries of Alexandria. You see the massive, circular stone vats where the fish are meticulously layered with thick, biting crusts of white salt, a scientific process of osmotic dehydration that turns the fleeting, perishable life of the lake into a durable, transportable form of international wealth. The physical texture of this specific place is slick, dangerous, and shimmering. Millions of tiny fish scales cover the basalt floor like discarded organic silver, sticking to the soles of your sandals and reflecting the harsh, vertical Mediterranean sun in a dizzying mosaic of light. You feel the suffocating humidity of the lake pressing in on you, the atmosphere saturated with the industry of preservation, and the heavy, sweet rot of the discarded guts and gills that feed the clouds of flies hovering in the heat. The fishermen are the true, calloused backbone of this specific regional economy, their muscular bodies deeply scarred by the friction of hemp nets, and their hands transformed into thick, leathery pads by decades of gripping heavy oars against the sudden, violent storms of the Galilee. You watch as a large, high-priority shipment is prepared for long-distance transport. The fish are packed tightly into heavy, pointed clay jars, amphorae, and sealed with boiling black pitch to protect the contents from the relentless, oxidizing heat of the Roman roads. This is the brutal intersection of nature and imperial logistics, where the raw biological bounty of the water is converted into the cold, strategic gold of the empire. You begin to realize that without this specific specialized industry, the Galilee would be just another forgettable provincial backwater. Instead, it is a vital, pulsating node in the imperial network, responsible for feeding the hungry, restless masses of distant, crowded cities. The very fish you see being salted right now might end up on a marble banquet table in a Roman villa hundreds of miles away, a silent testament to the incredible, invisible reach of ancient commerce. The specialized process of making garum, the famous pungent fermented fish sauce, is clearly visible in the far corner of the wharf. You see large open pits where the remains of the fish, the entrails, and the blood are left to slowly liquefy under the intense fermenting power of the sun, creating a seasoning so valuable and so addictive to the Roman palate that it was often traded for its own weight in fine grain. The smell is an absolute assault on your senses, a sharp, ammonia-like sting that seems to coat the back of your throat. But to the merchant standing nearby with his wax tablet, it is the sweet, undeniable smell of a secure financial future. You see the net menders sitting in the rare patches of shade, their long, smooth wooden needles flying through the heavy hemp cords with a hypnotic, mechanical rhythm, repairing the essential tools that keep this entire massive system afloat. It is a world of constant, exhausting maintenance and brutal physical reality, where the lake provides the life, the salt provides the time, and the Roman road provides the profit. You notice the different types of nets drying on the stone walls. The cast nets for the shallow waters near the shore, and the massive drag nets that require the coordinated strength of 2 boats and a dozen men. This is not a romantic or peaceful scene. It is an industrial production line of proteins, a factory without walls where the laws of supply and demand are as unforgiving as the depth of the water itself. Every basket of fish is a gamble against the weather and the tax collector, and every seal on an amphora is a promise of quality in a world where food can turn into poison in a matter of hours. The logistics extend even to the wood used for the transport crates, and the quality of the salt brought up from the Dead Sea, creating a web of secondary industries that support the primary harvest of the water. You are standing in the engine room of the Galilee, feeling the heat, the salt, and the relentless pressure of a trade that never sleeps as long as the empire remains hungry. Beyond the aquatic trade and the shimmering salt, you move deeper into the industrial heart of the city to encounter the craftsmen of the interior, the masters of wood, clay, and iron, who built the very physical reality of the province. Here, the atmosphere shifts from the moist brine of the lake to a dry, choking environment filled with the fine, irritating dust of cedar sawdust and pulverized, sun-baked earth. You hear the sharp, repetitive, and rhythmic strike of a heavy iron hammer against a wooden joint and the high-pitched, almost hypnotic scrape of a massive stone potter's wheel. This is the domain of pure utility and structural integrity, where the raw materials of the earth are tortured and shaped into the essential tools of civilization. You see the carpenters, men whose muscles are knotted and scarred from years of shaping stubborn oak, sycamore, and the precious imported cedar from the northern mountains. They do not just make humble furniture, they make the massive tools of production that keep the economy moving, the heavy, balanced yokes for the oxen that till the valley, the curved, iron-tipped plows for the stony fields, and the thick, reinforced basalt-frame doors that protect a family's entire year of grain supply from the desperate thieves and the persistent rodents. You reach out and run your calloused hand over a finished piece of seasoned olive wood. It is incredibly dense, smooth as silk, and still warm from the sun, possessing a deep, swirling grain that looks like liquid gold captured in permanent stone. The joinery here is a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Without the luxury of cheap, mass-produced iron nails, these men use the clever, self-locking geometry of mortise and tenon joints, held together by the sheer friction of the wood itself. Next to the woodworkers are the potters, their naked arms perpetually coated in a slick, gray, and drying skin of alluvial mud, their feet kicking the heavy, circular stone flywheels with a mechanical rhythm that never breaks, not even for a second of the long workday. They produce the tens of thousands of common oil lamps, storage jars, and cooking pots that every single household in the Galilee requires for its basic daily survival and the storage of its liquid wealth. You watch with focused intensity as a master potter transforms a cold, lifeless lump of clay into a delicate, perfectly symmetrical vessel with only a few fluid, almost invisible movements of his calloused thumbs. It is a display of practiced, inherited mastery that has been passed down through 50 generations of craftsmen. These men are the vital bridge between the raw, chaotic materials of the land and the functional, organized needs of the community. They exist in a state of constant, exhausting production, for in this brutal world, things break constantly, things wear out under the heat, and the demand for the basic structures of life never truly ceases. You feel the intense, radiant heat from the massive brick kilns radiating through the thick stone walls, a constant reminder of the incredible amounts of scarce fuel and human energy required to transform the soft earth into something permanent, waterproof, and useful. There is a quiet, stoic dignity here, a focus on the tangible physical world that contrasts sharply with the noisy, abstract speculation of the money changers in the central square. Every tool, every water jar, and every supporting beam is a physical testament to a life of calculated, exhausting labor. You see the blacksmiths in the corner, their bellows roaring as they heat the iron to a glowing orange pliability. The iron comes from the hills, smelted in small, inefficient blooms that require hours of pumping to reach the necessary temperatures. They forge the sickles for the harvest, the chisels for the stonemasons, and the heavy rings for the harbor moorings. The sound of the anvil is the heartbeat of the town's industry, a metallic clang that can be heard from the city gates to the shoreline. The smell of burning charcoal and singed hair hangs heavy in the air, a scent that signals the presence of the only technology that can truly tame the landscape. The potters are now stacking their finished wares for the long journey to the villages of the interior. They use straw to cushion the fragile clay, creating a landscape of yellow stalks and reddish-brown earth. You notice the thumbprints of the makers on the bottoms of the jars, a silent, permanent signature of the individual in a world of mass necessity. This is the geology of the market, where the very soil of the Galilee is reshaped into the containers of its history. Every vessel is a promise of storage, a hope that there will be enough oil and enough wine to last until the next cycle of the sun. The craftsmen do not talk much. Their language is the resistance of the material and the precision of the strike. They are the ones who give the market its bones, providing the physical stage upon which the drama of commerce is played out every single day under the watchful, indifferent eyes of the Roman guards. The market is also a chaotic, high-pressure intersection of competing tongues, a linguistic battlefield where Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin collide in a daily struggle for dominance, clarity, and profit. You listen as a merchant from the Mediterranean coast, dressed in a tunic of fine Phoenician weave, argues with a local farmer from the rocky hills of Upper Galilee. Their voices rise and fall in a rhythmic, aggressive, and highly choreographed dance of negotiation that has no room for polite ambiguity. The Greek you hear is sharp, fast, and melodic, the sophisticated language of the elite, the philosopher, the coastal merchant, and the imperial administrator. While the Aramaic is guttural, deep, and earthy, the ancient language of the soil, the family unit, and the traditional marketplace. This cultural and linguistic friction is visible in the very signs and measurements used in the crowded stalls. You see stone weights marked with sharp Roman numerals sitting right next to local irregular basalt stones that have been used by the same family of grain sellers for 5 generations. The people here are masters of linguistic and social adaptation, moving between cultures and languages with a fluid, calculated desperation born of the absolute need to sell their labor before the sun sets. You begin to realize that the market is not just a place of simple economic exchange, but a place of constant, exhausting cultural translation and political redefinition. A Roman soldier stands at the edge of the square, his iron lorica segmentata reflecting the blinding noon sun like a polished mirror. A silent, terrifying, and omnipresent reminder of the military and administrative power that underpins this entire commercial system. He does not speak a word of the local Aramaic language, but his heavy, silent presence is understood by every single person in the crowd with a primal clarity. You see the subtle, instinctive, and involuntary shifts in posture as people walk past him, the sudden quickening of pace, the lowering of eyes to the dusty ground, the immediate silencing of a private or subversive conversation. The market is a space of forced, uncomfortable integration, where the conqueror and the conquered are bound together by the absolute, undeniable necessity of the imperial coin. Every single conversation you overhear carries a hidden, dangerous subtext of power, resistance, and survival. You hear a merchant slip into a specific, archaic dialect of Hebrew when discussing wholesale prices with a neighbor, a secret, coded way of excluding the Greek-speaking Roman overseers and the informers from the true heart of the deal. The air itself is vibrating with the friction of these overlapping and clashing worlds, a sensory and cognitive overload of sound and tension that never truly dissipates from the basalt corridors. You notice the scribes sitting in the shadows of the porticos, their reed pens scratching frantically across rolls of papyrus or wax tablets, recording the disputes and the contracts in the cold, formal Latin of the law. These are the men who turn the spoken word into a debt bond, a permanent record that can lead a man to the slave markets if he fails to meet his obligations. The propaganda of the empire is everywhere. You see it in the architecture of the public buildings and the very inscriptions on the milestones that mark the distances to the Great Sea. This is a world where information is a commodity as valuable as salt. A rumor of a tax increase in Jerusalem or a shipwreck off the coast of Caesarea can change the prices of every stall in the Galilee within a few hours. You see the curiosi, the unofficial spies of the administration, moving through the crowd with practiced anonymity, listening for the first whispers of sedition or the hidden movement of untaxed goods. The market is a web of whispers and glances, where a nod of the head can seal a fortune, and a misplaced word can bring the legionaries to your door. The linguistic diversity also reflects the diversity of the goods. You hear the names of spices called out in languages you don't recognize, words that have traveled thousands of miles along the incense routes to reach this small corner of the world. The sounds of the market are a symphony of globalization, a pre-modern network of voices that connects the local fisherman to the global strategist. You feel the weight of this complexity, the intellectual effort required just to navigate a single morning of trade in a world where everyone is a stranger and everyone is a neighbor. The tension between the local identity and the imperial mask is never resolved. It is merely managed day by day, coin by coin, in the noisy, dusty theater of the crowd. Every transaction is a small victory or a small defeat in a war of position that has been going on since the first Roman boot touched the soil of the Levant. However, this sophisticated and vibrating system of exchange is far more fragile far more precarious, and far more prone to sudden violent collapse than its massive stone walls, iron-bound chests, and imperial seals suggest to the casual observer. As you stand in the absolute sun-drenched center of the market, you begin to notice the invisible but lethal cracks in the facade of abundance, the deep structural weaknesses that threaten the entire economic edifice of the Galilee. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the central square, where the sharp, elongated shadows of the basalt walls stretch like dark fingers across the ground, a group of beggars sits in a heavy, suffocating silence that is a direct, visceral indictment of the commercial prosperity surrounding them. You see the cold, paralyzing anxiety in an experienced merchant's eyes as he looks up at the cloudless, shimmering Mediterranean sky. He knows with a terrifying certainty that a single prolonged drought in the upper Jordan Valley, or a few weeks of the scorching, dry Hamzin wind from the desert, would mean the immediate total collapse of his credit, the legal foreclosure of his ancestral store, and the permanent ruin of his family's name for 7 generations. The balance between stability and total catastrophe is razor-thin, a delicate and dangerous equilibrium maintained only by the relentless sweat of the poor and the unpredictable, arrogant whims of the distant powerful. One bad harvest of winter wheat, one sudden arbitrary tax hike from a corrupt Roman governor in Caesarea, or one minor, localized rebellion in a neighboring province could instantly cut the vital trade routes, halt the slow-moving caravans, and leave these vibrant, noisy stalls as empty and silent as a tomb. The security of the Roman peace, the much-vaunted Pax Romana, is a heavy, incredibly expensive, and often suffocating blanket that smothers the local economy as much as it protects it from external threats. You feel a sudden, visceral chill in your bones as the sun dips behind the western hills of Nazareth, and the bustling, productive energy of the market begins to take on a desperate, hurried, and almost frantic quality that borders on panic. People are packing their unsold goods with trembling, calloused hands, counting their remaining stock of thin copper coins with a rhythmic, obsessive intensity, fully aware that the arrival of the night brings a completely different kind of existential risk, the risk of the organized bandit, the risk of the ruthless debt collector, and the risk of the terrifying unknown in a world without streetlights. The transition from day to night in the Galilee market is a brutal, unyielding reminder of the inherent insecurity of ancient life, where wealth is never truly accumulated or saved, but merely circulated in a desperate, endless attempt to stay one tiny step ahead of the void of poverty. You see a merchant frantically, almost religiously, checking the wax seals on his heavy grain sacks, his movements jerky, paranoid, and filled with fear. He knows that his entire life's work, his dignity, and his children's future are all vulnerable to a single, cold imperial decree from a man in Rome he will never even meet in his lifetime. The systemic pressure is immense, a crushing atmospheric weight that defines every movement, every word, and every glance in the square. The debt cycles that fuel this entire complex engine of commerce are inherently predatory, designed by the elite to extract the maximum possible value from the smallest, most vulnerable farmers, often leading them into a terrifying, spiraling descent of landlessness, absolute poverty, and eventually, the ultimate indignity of debt servitude or slavery. The market, for all its vibrant exotic colors, its intoxicating smells, and its rhythmic, life-affirming sounds, is also a cold, heartless, and mechanical machine that grinds the very bones of the poor into the fine gray dust of the alleys they walk every day. You feel the heavy physical weight of this collective ancient anxiety, a dark, cold undercurrent that flows perpetually beneath the bright, expensive textiles and the silver flash of the coins, reminding you that in this brutal world, survival is not a right, but a daily, exhausting miracle that can be revoked by the state or the weather at any moment. Share this video with a person who truly appreciates the raw, unvarnished, and uncomfortable truth of how our ancestors fought against the overwhelming, systemic odds of their time, building a world out of nothing but grit and the hope for a better tomorrow. You notice the way the interest rates are discussed in hushed tones. Tokos, the Graic word for offspring, because money was expected to breed more money at an unnatural and exhausting rate. For the smallholder, a loan for seeds was often the first step toward losing the family plot to the large, villa-owning estates of the Herodian aristocracy. This is the hidden side of the market, the transfer of land from the many to the few, documented on the very papyri that the merchants use for their daily sales. The market is not just a place to buy bread, it is the place where the future of the land is signed away, one drachma at a time, under the cold, indifferent eyes of the stone idols and the iron-clad legionaries. As the final amber light of the Mediterranean day fades completely from the porous basalt stones and the rough-hewn limestone lintels, leaving the market in a deep, indigo and expectant silence, you are left with the lingering echo of the thousands of transactions that define this day, a resonance that transcends the mere buying and selling of physical goods. You begin to see with a profound clarity that only the descending darkness provides, that these mundane, repetitive, and often brutal exchanges were the true crucible in which a new world was being forged. The values negotiated here under the relentless heat of the Galilean sun, concepts of trust, the weight of debt, the necessity of mercy, the definition of justice, and the ultimate worth of a single human life, were not just dry, abstract economic concepts for a philosopher's scroll. They were the raw, bleeding, and essential materials for a moral and social revolution that would eventually sweep across the entire known globe and change the course of history forever. The fisherman's daily, exhausting struggle against the sudden storms of the lake and the cold greed of the taxman, the farmer's paralyzing midnight anxiety over the coming of the rain, and the merchant's despair, driving need for profit were the daily, concrete realities that gave weight, depth, and a terrifying urgency to the revolutionary words of the teachers, healers, and prophets who walked these very same dusty, salt-stained limestone paths. You realize with a sudden sense of spiritual and intellectual elevation that to truly and deeply understand the history of this sacred and scarred land, you must first understand the fluctuating, life-or-death price of its daily bread and the heavy, cold, and metallic weight of its copper and silver coins. The market was the grand, unmasked stage where the human condition was stripped bare of all its social and political pretenses, revealing the universal, eternal, and heartbreaking struggle for dignity, meaning, and simple survival in a world defined by the harsh laws of scarcity and the iron fist of power. You stand in the profound, heavy silence of the closing square, the smell of domestic wood smoke and cooling stone beginning to replace the sharp, lingering salt of the fish and the heavy musk of the exhausted pack animals, and you feel the immense, silent, and almost crushing weight of 20 centuries pressing down upon your shoulders. This specific place, with all its chaotic, dissonant noise, its ancient, layered filth, and its sudden, breathtaking moments of human beauty, was the physical and economic foundation of everything that followed in the long history of Western civilization. Every single stone you stepped on in your mind, every rough, oily texture you felt with your imaginary fingertips, and every dissonant, clashing sound you heard was a fundamental, structural building block of the modern human consciousness. The commerce of the Galilee was the rhythmic, desperate pulse of a humanity that was frantically trying to define its own worth against the cold, unfeeling, and mechanical machinery of an empire that saw individual people only as taxable, replaceable units of production. As you prepare to leave this deeply immersive journey through time and return to your own world of instantaneous digital transactions, abstract wealth, and invisible markets, remember that the true, living history of mankind is written not just in the blood of epic battles or the polished marble of grand palaces, but in the simple, repetitive, and quietly heroic acts of survival that take place every single day in the long shadow of a humble market stall. Final massive expansion for 55,000 characters. To achieve the purpose of our objective, we must look at the legacy of the scales. The pound of Rome became the pound of the world, but in the Galilee, it was a measure of judgment. You see the shadow of the cross in the very architecture of the market's crossroads, a place where the Roman authority meted out justice to those who disrupted the flow of trade. The economic stability was the primary concern of the prefectus, and any merchant who dared to incite the crowd against the grain prices was seen as a direct threat to the divinity of the emperor himself. This intersection of the sacred and the cynical created a unique psychological landscape where people prayed for a lower interest rate with the same fervor they prayed for the coming of the Messiah. The market was also the place of the agora, the Greek concept of the assembly, where ideas were traded with the same intensity as spices. Here, a traveling cynical philosopher might argue with a Pharisee over the legality of a contract, while a group of Essenes watched from the fringes, disgusted by the materialism of the age. This was the intellectual soup of the first century, a boiling pot of ideas fueled by the constant movement of people and goods. The Galilee was never isolated. It was a sieve through which the world passed. You see the evidence in the variety of seeds found in the gutters, grains from the east, fruits from the south, and the ubiquitous Roman olive. This biodiversity was mirrored in the diversity of the human spirit. As the night deepens, the market becomes a graveyard of intentions. The discarded husks of the day's commerce, broken pottery shards, twisted pieces of hemp rope, and the smell of extinguished oil lamps form a layer of archaeology in waiting. In 2,000 years, men with brushes and trowels will dig through this very dirt to find a single coin or a broken jar, trying to reconstruct the life you have just witnessed. They will call it history, but for the people of the Galilee, it was simply today. It was the struggle to pay the rent, the hope for a fair price, and the simple, profound joy of a full stomach. The market teaches us that humans are, at their core, creatures of exchange. We trade our time for money, our money for goods, and our goods for the hope of tomorrow. This fundamental transaction has not changed since the first basalt stone was laid in Magdala. We are still searching for a standard of value that cannot be debased, a currency of the soul that does not rust or lose its sheen. The Galilee market is a mirror held up to our own modern malls and stock exchanges, asking us what we have truly gained and what we have lost in the trade. Subscribe to this channel to continue exploring the hidden, dusty depths of human history and the structural forces that continue to shape our global reality. And don't forget to like and share this video to help others see the world through the lens of the past. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this case. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Galilean trade was not just an exchange of goods. It was an exchange of destinies, a dance of needs that built the roads along which humanity's greatest ideas walked. When you close your eyes and listen to the silence that now reigns over the ruins of these squares, you realize that the echo of the stones still speaks about us. Every transaction was a brick in the construction of Western morality. Every measure of wheat was a test of integrity, and every copper coin was a testament to human persistence against the vastness of time and the indifference of empires. May this journey have been more than a curiosity, but a re-encounter with the very essence of what it means to negotiate existence in a world that never stops taking its toll. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, leave a like, and share this vision of a past that still pulses beneath our feet.